John Lee Real Estate, find you the best rate. All throughout Philly, like Schuylkill Expressway.
Hello, everyone. This is John Lee, your local real estate agent in the Philadelphia, greater Philadelphia area. I am here with Jake Lerman. Jake, give us that intro, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you got going on, brother.
Hey John, what's up?
Yeah.
I am in corporate sales. I've been in sales for about 17 years now. I used to be in financial services, so I first started out just literally selling life insurance, which I think is probably might be an entry point into sales for a lot of people. um, then I wound up like getting licenses and going into an investment bank and going through that whole system, and then uh, I don't know if I told you this story or not, but I had a client who I was talking to once who ran a business, a big, business that he actually wound up selling for several hundred million. And he said to me at one point, he goes, Jake, you shouldn't be the guy coming out to someone like me to talk about investing their money. You should be the guy who people come to talk about investing your money. You should be in sales, corporate sales, not financial services. And I never thought about it. It had never, been something I thought about getting into. So I wound up actually pursuing that, found the right opportunity. So I actually sell construction materials to large scale commercial projects like hotels, apartments, casinos, student housing, stuff like that. And so I've been doing that specifically now for about 8 years. But and by the way, I stream of consciousness all the time. So feel free to cut me off and just interject whenever I'm off the rails.
I got you, brother. I got you.
But interestingly enough, it's funny, right? Because as a kid, if you ask a kid what they want to do, what do we all say? Like, oh, I want to be a professional basketball player, or an astronaut. I don't know. You wind up saying something as a kid that obviously there's a percentage of us who wind up actually doing that, which is amazing. And most of us wind up, getting into the real world and not actually ever thinking about the career that we wind up into. We usually wind up falling into it somehow, right?
Right.
And that's one big thing that I try to engage with, especially younger people, the most about is just trying to figure out, of course, whatever your aspirations are for your profession, like look around you though. Like most of us don't have, astronauts or athletes like living on our block or who we see at family barbecues. Like when you talk to an adult or you talk to someone, like not a lot of kids or young people are asking, questions about professions and trying to learn more about it or try and figure out how their skill set or what they're into aligns with that. Because the biggest thing that crushes me as an adult is seeing people who are miserable and hate their job, right? Because I can't imagine that. That's torturous to me. Like getting up and like, oh, okay, let me just pray this day quickly ends, as opposed to someone who wakes up like, I'm ready to go, I like what I'm doing, like I'm having fun. So for me, I'm fortunate because if you'd asked me as a kid, hey, do you think you'll ever like doing corporate sales as an adult? I'd be like, what? That sounds awful. No, I'm too, but you wind up getting into it. And then for me, I've been really fortunate and I have a lot of fun and I really like what I do and it's very challenging. And so, I had the pleasure of looking forward to Monday as opposed to dreading it like a lot of people.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So Jake, I mean, if we can kind of go along the lines of your journey and how you got into sales, like let's go before that. Like
Yeah.
as a kid, like how did you grow up and your path of, from going from, obviously all the way from elementary school to high school to college. Like tell us a little bit about your story there.
Sure. So my mom is an Italian immigrant. She came to America at age 10. So she grew up like immigrant poor, which is different than like a lot of people who are grown up. Like my dad grew up like Philly poor, but my mom grew up like immigrant poor. So, my parents, I guess my point is, my dad was the first, my dad wound up going to college and becoming a lawyer, but he grew up super poor in Northeast Philly. And my mom grew up, you know, um, in a small little row house in West Philly in an Italian immigrant neighborhood. So for my parents, it was a very, I had a sister, I have a sister, and us becoming educated and becoming professionals was such a big deal to my parents. And my dad used to always tell me, I knew I was going to be a professional when I saw the way people treated my dad, because his dad, worked odd jobs, cleaned offices, and he saw how people treated him. And I guess he said to himself, I'm never going to let people look down on me or be disrespectful towards me because I'm going to have a career and a job they have no choice but having respect for. So
Right.
that was something that, those are those seminal moments as a kid that stick with you. I remember, I'll never forget him saying that to me and explaining that. And ironically enough, my sister got straight A's, wound up going to Ivy League, that whole thing. So my parents were always very focused on me in the sense of like, I felt like to a degree, they thought like, all right, we got two kids. One of them's doing great. We got this other one who, this is good. You know what it's like? It's like, this is the troubled one. This is the, so I always felt like the bar was set pretty low for me as a kid, but I didn't mind it. Like there's a misconception that a lot of people think I resented my sister's success, and I didn't, because I knew that I was never going to be successful as a student the way she was.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find my thing that I was good at the way she was with school. That's what I really searched for. And the thing that happened to me as a kid that stuck with me the most is I was at a friend's house, and I remember his mom talking to my mom when she picked me up, and she goes, my son, they tell me that he has really bad attention deficit disorder and he can't focus and he's not good at learning. But I buy him a brand new video game and a magazine, and he reads the magazine end to end, and he spends 30 consecutive hours playing the video game and he beats it. So I don't understand. It seems to me like my kid actually knows how to learn and knows how to focus. And I remember hearing that, and I was probably 7 or 8. And I remember thinking like, yeah, no, that kid doesn't have an issue learning. Like I played the same video game as him and I can't get past round 1. And he beat it in 2 days. The kid clearly knows how to focus, clearly knows how to learn. It's just obviously, if it's something he's not passionate about, right? And so at that young age, that kind of hit me like, don't let it crush you when teachers tell me all about what's wrong with me. Because that, I'm sure it's changed now because I'm 41. So I'm, going back 30, 25 years. I heard the same thing a lot about being hyperactive, is a distraction to others, has difficulty focusing. And I kind of always thought about my friend in that video game magazine. And I thought, well, I'm probably like him. If I'm passionate and I like something, I probably won't have an issue learning it and focusing on it. Right. So even at that young age, that's what kind of planted that seed of like, hey, at some point you gotta do something that you actually care about enough that you can focus and it's not a chore, And so because like a lot of kids, I idolized my dad in a lot of ways. I just always thought I'd be a lawyer like him. So I never really thought about, hey, what am I going to do as an adult? I just thought like, all right, I'll be a lawyer. And I was never really concerned with even thinking about myself as an adult. As a kid, I cared about sports, trying to meet girls, what I mean? Like, that's all I really cared. So like, even in college, I was never sitting there like plotting like myself as an adult and as a businessman. Right. And what really changed for me was I went to law school. I did 1 year of it and I hated it and I did horrible at it. And it was, for me, I loved reading and writing in college, and I was an English major and I did great in those classes. I had like an A or an A- average. The type of writing I had to do in law school, it was all like legal memos and briefs and like every punctuation and I'm like, this is torture. I hate this. And I talked to one of my friend's moms who ran a hedge fund, and she's like, Jake, you got to get into sales. And that's when I was like, really? She's like, yeah, you clean up. You're great. You're so good with people. And so that's when I was like, okay, let me try that, and that's what got me into life insurance sales, because that was really at the time seemed like the best option for me. I had actually I don't even know if I ever told you this, John. I had a really big, prominent commercial real estate company in Center City that offered me a job doing commercial real estate. And I said no to it because I didn't want to go get my real estate license, which is so funny because you think back on when you're young and you're stupid. And like, I pursued my insurance license because that was, to me, just like a lot easier. You didn't have to really
did you end up getting the series exam too? Like the series 6 or 7?
Yeah. So I did insurance for a few years. Then I got accepted into a training program at Morgan Stanley. That's when I went and I got the 6, the 63, the 7.
And for our listeners, I would say the series 6 or 7 exam is probably harder than getting the commercial license. So
yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the other funny thing is I was always
so it's ironic. It's ironic.
Very ironic. I had no clue. I was a dumb kid. And it's so funny. That's why I always expect young people to not, to make mistakes and to kind of, to a degree, I don't want to use harsh language. I don't want to say be an idiot, but just like make decisions that like older, wiser people look back on like, you're an idiot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like we learn we learn through our mistakes, right? And so it's laughable to me that I had this amazing opportunity that I by the way, see, I've always been a hustler, right? And I know a lot of people say that. That's like, I'm a hustler, I'm a go-getter. But for me, it wasn't just about the hustle. It was about how can I outsmart the other hustlers. That was the game to me. So what I did was I went through my alumni network, right? And I always knew that like people typically respond to flattery. So I sent out like 40 emails to people who had jobs that were like important jobs or like at important companies. No one responded, right? And I wrote like the respectful, like, hi, I'm a, recently graduated. I'm looking for an opportunity tonight. And no one responded. So I'm like, all right, you know what I got to do? I just got to, most people at their core like to hear about themselves and like to hear, and if you see a guy walking down the street who makes a lot of money in business, chances are no one knows who he is, right? Like, it's not like we're famous or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would Google people and I'd find out something about them. And in the email, I'd wrote, oh, hey, Mr. X and X from this real estate. I read that article you had that mentioned you in the Philly Voice about that acquisition you did. That was brilliant. And I just wanted to let you know that. And all of a sudden they start responding, right? Because I flattered them and I kind of stroked their ego. And I had a guy who ran a huge commercial real estate firm. And by huge, it was not huge. Like it was a family-owned business, but they were doing big business for a family-owned business. And I went and interned with him. I called him. I mean, he paid me, but it was right out of college where I didn't need, I could basically be paid whatever and be okay. And I told him, I was very blunt. That was the other thing. I never wanted to like backdoor sell anyone. I always wanted to make my objectives clear up front. Some people are nervous about that. So I'd be like, listen, I'm interning with you. The goal is for me to be great at what I'm doing for you and for you to then recommend me to people. Like, that's why I'm doing this. Like, I'm not, yeah. And I was very clear about that. And typically people really respect that, especially from young people, because they're not used to it, right? A lot of young people are either overly ambitious and a little bit too like, oh, it's all about me, or the opposite, where like, they're not assertive enough about what they want and what their objective is. And, and he's the one who actually hooked me up with that opportunity at that commercial real estate firm. So anyway, so I wound up going into insurance. And funny story is, at that point, my big motivation was I felt like a failure to a degree because law school didn't work out for me. And so my whole motivation was, I'm not, kind of to the degree of like, I'm not going out like this. Like, I'm going to go prove I'm successful. Now, it was the wrong mindset to have to a degree, because it was really just about me trying to project something to other people who I thought were judging me. But it at least made me feel like I had to fight. Like, it was that first kind of like, it was the first time in my life where I was like, oh, oh, wait, like, I got to go actually really start to have some success at something, because it is important to me that other people go, oh, okay, you're doing well, you're successful, good for you. So I just started really, I was selling life insurance to mostly, elderly people. And so it wasn't anything glamorous, but I was, hammering my leads, hammering my phones, going to any, like, I was working hard. Mm-hmm. And I was good enough at just talking to people and not, there are some people who, no matter how smart or talented they are, they struggle talking to people they don't know, right? Especially in a business setting.
Right.
That was never an issue for me, as you can maybe tell. So I was good at it. I could go into somebody's house I never met, and it wouldn't be like, like when people try to build rapport, and it's so cringy because they're like, oh, like, well, I can't help but notice there's a golf trophy. Does this mean you like to golf? Like, so I would just walk in and just start cracking jokes, or just start like making them feel at ease and no defenses. So I started doing really well. And my boss, who owned the company, this is a guy who super successful, right? So to a degree, he was kind of like a mentor idol of mine, because I was like, oh, wow, look at this guy. He's super successful. Like, I want to be like him. And right off the jump, he spotted it in me. And he's like, look, Jake, at first his flattery was basically like, I don't know what's a polite way to say it. You're fearless. Yeah. That's the polite way of saying what he said to me. He was basically like, you're not scared. You can talk to people. You're not intimidated. Like, and you're working hard. And he goes, look, keep this up for 6 to 8 months, and I'm going to consider you for a management position. After about a year of me just grinding, and mind you, I'm young. I'm fresh out of college. I'm living in a dilapidated apartment. I'm paying $500 a month for. I don't have any bills really, other than, whatever, my rent and food, basically, my car. So I'm just focused on just sales, like, get promoted. And I wound up getting a management position. He started flying me across the country because we were hiring insurance agents in other parts of the country, and I would go out there for a week, interview, decide who to hire, then go back a week later and actually hit the field with them and train them in the field, then manage them, virtually, so to speak. And I was doing really well with that for about a year. So after about 2 years, he gave me a really big promotion. And this is a great story because I'll never forget. I'm 26 at this point, and he goes, Jake, I'm going to give you this promotion, and I know you're going to F it up. You are. There's no doubt in my mind you're going to screw this up because you're too young, you're too naive, and you're too immature. But the truth is you work so hard and the numbers that you have are so good. I can't not give it to you because you've earned it. But I'm just telling you, nobody your age deserves this job. And I am completely confident that you're going to screw it up because you're not ready for it. And I remember at the time he said that to me. I'm like, okay, whatever. Screw you. I'll show you. John, what do you think happened?
Messed it up.
Dude, yeah, I mean, look, I did well for a while, and then the bottom line is I was just not mature enough to know how to run a business like that.
Yeah.
I just didn't have it in me. I didn't get it. I was too young, and when there were hiccups, I would panic, and then it would affect me, and and I didn't have that tunnel vision of, don't ever get too high, don't ever get too low, don't panic, look to the long term. Like I just the way I describe it is I thought it was all about the highlights, and I didn't realize really it's all about the stuff that don't show up in the stats, right? Like if this is like a football analogy, yeah, the touchdown passes and catches and the runs are what make it on Sports Center. But like, let's be honest, the majority of football games are won in the trenches, right? Like the blocking, the tackling, the scheming. Like so at that point, that's what I needed to know. And I screwed it up, and I wound up leaving there after, and I went from a national position. At that point, what I wanted, the validation I wanted, I got, right? Because I was making really good money for a kid my age. My family knew I was flying all over the country, eating an expensive restaurant. So like all the I bought a brand new car, like all the like quote unquote, like you see someone, you're like, this must mean they're doing well. I had that. So I was kind of past that. And now I was like, all right, now I just need to find like what's my actual career going to be. And this is the first time in my adult life where I'd actually thought to myself, like, okay, like now, I was dating someone who I wound up marrying later. So at that point I was like, all right, like things are getting serious now. I'm not just like a dumb kid who like, wears sweatpants all the time. And like, like I got to actually like now like be an adult. And that's when I went into financial services. And again, kind of same thing. It wasn't a great fit for me, but I did enjoy it and I was having fun. And that was where I first started to really not just look at what was right in front of me, but start to plan for the future and start to figure out, when Jay-Z says, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. Like that was my first moment where I was like, this is the Jake Lerman business. I'm building a Jake Lerman. That was the first time where I'm like, it wasn't just about 26-year-old Jake Lerman anymore. I was like, I want to start to work on something that I'm going to eat off of when I'm 30 and 40 and 50. And like, so that's when I first kind of had that entrepreneurial spirit that hit me. And then, so when I was mentioning earlier, I made the decision to go into corporate sales. And the biggest thing I thought to myself was, I'm not going to chase a first year salary. I'm not going to chase what is the most attractive offer. I'm going to chase, if I crush it, where can I see the most rewards in the future? And there was a company that at the time was doing 40 million in sales. And I was told that they were going to be projecting to do 80 million the next year and projecting to be doing 200 million within 3 years. And they're like, look, and I turned down some bigger offers to take that job. And that's the job that I took. And then I never left. And then that company that I worked for wound up getting bought by a company that owns 30 companies. And that was the big break in my career where I was promoted to national sales. And I was now selling across multiple, large companies. But that's kind of what led me there. And like I mentioned to you earlier, that the thing that I really point out the most, that I'm the most proud of, is it's not any number of like, I made this much, or I've made this many sales, or I've had this or whatever. It's, I really love having, doing what I do, and I have fun. And so I can wake up and not dread having to get dressed and get coffee and get in my car and be like, oh, like I really enjoy, and I'm really proud of the fact that I get to enjoy what I do, because that's a huge privilege. And you and I'm sure both know people who don't like what they do. And that for me, once you enjoy what you do, it's almost impossible to go back to the alternative, right? It feels like you're in jail. It's horrible. So that's where I am today.
No, that's awesome, Jake. That's like there's so much that I want to like go over and really like share with you. And the reason why I felt like you would be a great interview is because I felt like I resonated with you on so many levels. We've obviously had conversations on the side about like our careers and stuff, but for our listeners, like I was also in the financial services industry as a financial advisor as well. So it was even tough for me because a lot of cultural barriers and the way that I grew up. And also for our listeners, you knew both my brothers, right? Before you even knew me. And this was like years and years and years ago. But, uh, you know, I was taught like on many different levels, like even like shaking someone's hand. Like I would shake someone's hand with two hands, you know. I would not be able to look someone in the eye. I wouldn't be able to give a firm handshake. I was very shy. But a lot of those cultural barriers started to become broken through sales in a good way, right? I became a lot more open-minded. I was starting to feel way more comfortable talking to different kinds of people. However, in that same regard, what you explained when you got promoted, I started also to gain traction in my career, and then I myself got cocky too. You know, like I you know, I strained a couple of relationships. And like, especially with insurance, right? Like, you know, like the first thing that they tell your, you know, I'm 20 years old. So they're telling you, like, hey, go to your phone and call all the people in your phone.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm like blasting these people like every other day, calling them. And like, I remember like I had to average like 300 dials a day, you know, it was like boiler room, man. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't even like get up to take a piss because they always wanted me to be on the phone. So
Yeah.
those skills I don't regret.
Yeah.
I
They make
think
you stronger, right?
say it again.
They make you stronger.
Yeah, it made me definitely stronger. And then also I think those skills developed me into the person who I am today.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time for me to
Yeah.
like I was always acting like someone I shouldn't have been, but in
For sure.
reality, I should have just been a better version of myself, if that makes
Yep.
any sense.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I 100% was doing, and honestly, that's what the majority of people are doing, right? Like the majority of people, not to get too like analytical, but into psychology, but like are projecting to a degree, right?
right,
And you see that most people are either projecting what they think they should be, or what they want to be, or
exactly.
what they want others to think they are, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what most people are doing, and
right,
especially when you're young, like think about it, you're to a degree like you haven't yet really like stamped who you are, and so it's this phase of discovery, right? Like you're figuring out who you are because you have never been in these situations before as an adult. And
right,
then yeah, you it's like you said, that's why to me, like the idea of failure or screwing things up, it is the fastest way to success.
right,
And if you are one of these people who reads interviews or books from some of the most successful people, they'll tell you like, oh yeah, first I did this and it failed, then I did that and it failed, and they're like, if you want to be successful, you just keep failing until it finally clicks and you get it right,
right.
right? And so like I feel like when you make those mistakes, it's so much better for you in the long term because you figure it out and you learn from it, and then all of a sudden you become, like you were just saying, a much improved version of yourself, and you become that much more comfortable with who you really are as opposed to who you thought you were supposed to be.
Hmm. Hmm. And
Right.
and Jake, to like kind of switch gears for a second, like just so that people understand the history between you and I, like how did you meet our family? How did you get to know me? How did you get to know my brothers?
Sure. So I met your oldest brother in high school. I lived in the city as a kid, and I went to a little private school that ended at eighth grade. So once eighth grade ended, by that point, my dad had actually remarried and was now living out near Abington. So I wound up going to a private school in Abington where I met your oldest brother. And then I met your younger brother who was much younger. I'm not sure how much younger, but he was just always a little kid. That's all I remember. And then you were so. So me and your older brother Anderson, we became really close friends, and we hung out constantly. And a couple times I'd be over the house either after school, or I'd come over a few times for like what that was right when the Sixers started getting good with Iverson. That's
Yeah.
the era.
Yeah.
That's the era that I was in high school in.
Yeah.
So I remember like playoffs. I remember watching at least 3 or 4 playoff games at your house.
Yeah.
And I just remember you and your brother both being small, but just bouncing all, little kids who are, it's like a WWE wrestling ring, just like you and your brother just like bouncing off the walls and like jumping over sofas. And then I stayed in touch with your brother over the years. I actually stopped by and visited him at college at one point, and then we would see each other from time to time out of college or after college. And then you know how it is. Once I settled down and got married, and then it's there. Then all of a sudden you wind up losing contact for years, right? And then fortunately, though, I credit your brother. He did a better effort than I did at just staying in touch over a couple-year period. And then now your oldest brother opened up a business not far from where I lived. And so after him and I having talked here and there for years, I saw his name on the State Farm office that he runs. And I immediately stopped in. I was like, I know that's got to be it. You don't see Anderson Lee a lot, right? Like it's not like a name you see all the time. So I saw that and I'm like, I know that's my friend Andy. And it was great because you see the smile. Like when I first knocked on his door and he looks and he gives like that smile, like, oh great, look who it is. And it's just like, it's funny because now it's been like literally at that point it was like 20 years since we graduated high school or whatever. But there's a part of it when you were friends with someone, even if it's 20, 25 years later, even if your lives have changed, there's still that certain connection to your youth. And it's like you're a kid again.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so important about having long-term relationships with people is as much as we all change, really what we're doing is we're evolving, right? Like I love when people are like, oh, you're different from when I remember you. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's been 25 years. I would hope I'm different. Like, of course, but I'm not a different person. We just all evolve, right? Like we all become, and so it's great now having a chance now that we all are in somewhat close proximity and get a chance to see each other. That's great to all, get to be around people like you and your brothers and your family who I've known for so long. Like it's a really good feeling to know that you got this, because that's also rare. You don't talk to a lot of people who have relationships with friends, or it's not as common, not as often that you see someone who is still close to someone who they were close with 25 years ago,
right,
24 years ago.
Yeah, I mean that's really the power of networking, and I kind of wanted to tie that in with sales, right? Like networking and sales. And I think everyone uses the term networking so loosely that they almost can't even define what it is or what it means. So like for me, like in that case, in that scenario, it's like building connections, but also building meaningful connections that you've already had for so long ago. And like, yeah, like to be honest with you, Jake, like I know that you came over my parents' house, and I still remember 2001 because I was in 6th grade, or 5th or 6th grade, because I remember that phase of Allen Iverson and Sixers going to the finals. So like, but I don't entirely remember you, but but I do know that for me it was important to connect with people who I'm already associated with, and putting myself out there. Especially for someone like me who's very introverted in nature, it's really tough. I'm not going to lie to you. But I also understand how powerful it is to build these meaningful relationships, because in your examples of going from, doing financial advising all the way to now corporate sales, there had to have been some kind of level of connections that you had to have. I'm sure you went through it, obviously by working hard, but part of that is like defining those relationships and building them. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how do you define like how important is it to you to network, and how do you define networking?
Yeah, it's important. It's very important. I think that a lot of people use the term networking, like you said, and they don't really understand what it means. Like I know people who will go to a networking event and like barely say 5 words and be like, oh, I was just at this 4-hour networking event. And I'm like, no, you were just at a crowded place. That's what you were like. You didn't network. Like, what do you mean? Or
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I met someone and talked for 3, 4 sentences and then asked for their business card. And it's like, so, and there's a lot of false hustle, right? Like I used to work in financial services and people would be not pounding the phones, not having any real like serious conversations, but they'd be like, oh man, I worked all day. I sent 4 Facebook messages to friends from high school, and then I put 2 emails out. I made 6 calls, and it's just like, I'm like, all right, like that's kind of false hustle, right? Like, and sometimes you think like you don't know, so sometimes you might think that that's actually hustling. And in terms of like, yeah, networking, to me, it's about you always want to try and figure out, okay, like where am I specifically trying, like am I it's one thing if you're at like a family barbecue and you meet someone and you're like, oh wow, this is someone I can do work with. That's kind of like having your head on a swivel and like networking in what we call like natural markets. Like, but if you're specifically trying to network, it's about identifying like who should you be talking to and who not. And just because somebody says no to you, or just because somebody isn't really in your network, like, or someone you can't do business with, that's okay. Get the nose out of the way, focus on, it's all about, I'll go to networking events. They'll send me to, like let's say one of the branded hotels, like a Best Western networking event.
Yeah.
And if I can come out of there, like I don't want to try and have as many conversations as possible. I want to try and have as many meaningful interactions and connections. And a big part of it is identifying what that means, right?
Right.
And that's a big part of really knowing who you are, what you do, who's a good fit for you, who's not, and not spending too much time and effort chasing what you think is networking, when in actuality, it's really just kind of a waste of your time. Like, this is not someone you're going to do business with.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest part of it. Like, understand who do you want to work with? Who's the ideal client for you? Or at least who meets the criteria of what you have set for someone who you should be investing. Because a lot of times in sales, you're investing time, effort, energy, and work into something that may or may not ever pay off for you. So you want to do that wisely. Yeah, we all have duds, and we all have people who sometimes mislead and lie to us to get favors out of us, and then they wind up not doing business with us. That happens too. But for the most part, once you figure out what a real conversation connection sounds like it's almost like it's like a clicking, right? And then there's times you're like, oh wow, this is a good one. This might, and then you get it, and then you want to get those, and you want to keep going after those. That to me is what's most important in terms of networking, not just like saying networking and then just trying to meet people or trying to talk about what you do. And like, I've heard that mistake where people just tell you what they do and they just go on and on. And I'm like, yeah, it's like, no, like try and connect. And if you're in sales, guess what? What we do is all about, not us, is about the person who we're trying to sell to or we're trying to be in a relationship with.
Right.
What value do they need? Right. That's why you never, and I learned this actually at in the training program at Morgan Stanley. You have to earn the right to try and close someone, right? And that's always a discovery phase where you're discovering what do they need, right? And that's part of networking to tie it in, right? Like you're meeting someone, you're like, okay, what value do they need in their business? And can I provide that? Like, that's really the heart of it. And then if you can, okay, now prove it. Okay, you've proven it. Now convince them to give you a shot. Now don't screw it up, and keep. So it's like, to me, that's the biggest part of networking is identifying who you really want to be networking with and what it sounds and feels like when you actually connect with someone who is a legitimate prospect who might make a big difference in your business.
Yeah, no, dude, you hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say, just to add on to that, come into a place of contribution, for the longest time, especially, when I was younger, I always, and it's not to my fault. I think a lot of the times, you can kind of tell, especially for people who are in sales in the beginning, that they are, and we're naturally selfish beings, right? Humans are, right?
For sure.
So if we always talk about ourselves and what we can do, and the product, how good the product is that we're selling, or yada yada yada, but we're not really looking. And the biggest term that you use is discovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're not discovering the needs of the client, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of why we're even like talking to them, especially whether it's networking or sales. So Jordan Belfort has a very common question that is asked to him quite often. And for our listeners who don't know Jordan Belfort, that's the
Wolf of Wall Street.
yeah, Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
Like it's the sell me this pen, right?
Yeah.
If you ask 10 people to sell you a pen, the first
Mhm.
thing that they're all going to say is, this pen does this pen
Mhm.
does that. But they're not asking a discovery question.
Exactly.
Are you in the business to look for a pen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you
Do
know,
you need a pen? Do you use a
you,
pen?
yes. Do you use a pen? How do
What are
you
some issues you're having with pens that you use? Like, yeah,
exactly?
what
These
do
are
you wish if you could create the perfect
yeah,
pen?
you're hitting
What
it,
would it do
bro.
that you're? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what everyone always screws up, right? Oh, this pen's amazing. You can write upside down, and you know, yeah, that's where you figure out if someone knows sales or not,
yeah.
right?
So the discovery of that in sales is all the same in networking, and that's why I feel like those that are in sales do very well in networking too. So that's a good indication whether or not people can network is directly correlated with their sales skills. So I find myself in those positions quite often now, coming into a place of contribution more so than coming in, naturally wanting to help myself, right? One thing I learned from one of my mentors is that he is very good at being a connector. Like he is the contact point for like resources, whether or not you need like an accountant, you need a
Yeah,
painter, you need, a dentist, right?
sure.
As a real estate professional, I tried to provide that same kind of service because I would say, if I got maybe 10 phone calls, maybe two or three of them would be like, John, do you know a contractor? Do you know a
Sure.
painter? And sometimes it's also random. Like
Yeah.
I was able to connect someone who has a degree in mathematics or actuary. Like she has a background in actuary to like connect her to someone who runs a secondary school for mathematics for SAT prep. Like and again, just building those meaningful relationships is kind of what I defined on like really getting to details of networking. And dude, like you hit the nail on the head, and I thought was like very important for our listeners. I think that was like gold.
Yeah.
So, apart from that, I mean, a little bit about yourself, man. Like, you're currently obviously in corporate sales. Like, where do you see yourself in the future in the next 5 years? Like, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to do? What kind of moves, what kind of plays you trying to do?
Yeah. So it's funny because that's a question where when I do my year-end review with my like bosses and my bosses, they always ask that, right? Because they want to know like where if you're growing within the company, what direction do you want to go? And so the position I'm in right now is I basically run my own practice, right? Obviously, I'm not I work for a large company and so I'm not I always jokingly call myself half an entrepreneur because I'm not like a full entrepreneur. Like I didn't start my own business. I didn't take on all the financial risk, but I have the most entrepreneurial job that I can basically have working for like a company that could, be listed on NASDAQ, right? That kind of thing. Right now, I'm totally focused on building my practice. And the way I look at it is I want to get to a certain point and then I want to start to build my team out so that I can hire a junior associate and say, hey, I'm going to only focus on my top 20% of my clients who I like dealing with the most. I'm going to let you work 80% of my clients. I'm going to share the revenue with you. I'm going to teach you the business. I'm going to, that and then build out my sales practice. I don't have any interest in corporate management. And they've asked me about that. Like, I don't want to travel 2.5 weeks a month. That's not a lifestyle I'm interested in. And really, I don't want to be in meetings. Those corporate meetings, I always joke that they're meetings about meetings, right? And like, I can't, that's my ADD flares up in that setting when I'm sitting there and it's just like, no, like, can I go talk to people and bring in revenue? Like, can I actually work? Like, so I want to build my sales practice and I want to hire people and I want to build it out. And then I'd be more than happy to work in sales management. Like I'll work directly with salespeople, help them build their practices. Like that I'm interested in, but I don't ever want to be a corporate manager where I'm now overseeing not just sales, but also like all the logistics and admin and
Right,
back like
right.
that. No, like that's not my bag. I'm not good at that and I don't like it. So really where I see myself is building out this practice, getting it to as big as it can get, where it still fits my lifestyle that I want to have, and then grow from there. And it's a to me, what I enjoy most about that element of it is I feel like I have ownership of my practice, and I feel like I can kind of dictate as I get older, and hopefully as I continue to do well and get to a point where I don't have to work as hard or don't have to be so focused on my bringing in a certain level of income, I can kind of make the decision of, okay, how do I really want to do this? How involved do I want to be? What role do I, so I'll get there and I'll figure it out as I get there. I'm not there yet, but for now, for the foreseeable future, John, it's just all about building my practice and finding connections like with the best. Like I have clients who I like, but who I can tell you at a certain point, I'm not going to deal with them anymore. You know what I mean? Like right. I'm going to give them to someone else. And then I have clients who I will work with for the rest of my life because it's just like we work so well together and everything's in sync. And it's like, so I want to bring in as many new clients as I can where I know that they fit that top 20%, if that makes sense. Like right. I want like, okay, these are, and that's to me the most exciting part of the whole thing, because sometimes I'll be pursuing someone who I've identified as a good lead, as someone who I can work with. And it might be, I had someone who I sent probably 7-8 proposals to, had worked the phones with for 18 months. And then finally they did a deal with me. And now I think like we're going to grow from there. And it was 18 months. And so it's like, once you start to see those dominoes fall, to me, the best part of it is it's not like, oh, this is a sale. It's, oh, this is 5 sales a year for the next 10 years. Like that's, and then you get to work with people that you like working with and you enjoy and you're in sync with. Like I have clients who I'm always in sync with. I have some clients who we're always somehow out of sync with each other. Well, we make it work, right? But so like, that's really what I'm the most focused on. And that's what I have the most pride in ownership of, is my practice, the way I'm building it, because I'm trying to do it the right way. And to answer you about like, hey, where are you going to be in 5 years? I'm not exactly sure, but I can look at what I'm building and what I consider like the Jake Lerman business. And it will be a lot bigger than it is now. And I'm going to hopefully within 5 years for sure, have a bigger team than I have, who I can kind of mold the way I want to and run it the way I think it should be ran, and that has to do a lot with also just like how you work with your colleagues. I see a lot of teams where I'm like, I don't like the energy of that team. I don't like the leadership of that team. I don't think you're empowering the people that work for you. I think you're treating them like they work for you. And so that's the other part of it, is like building a culture that I'm really proud of and that I can say like, okay, this is what I'm most proud of. Not the fact that we did X amount of in revenue, but that like everyone on my team loves it and likes working with me.
Right. So for a plug there, you are hiring.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, my company's always hiring, and I am 100% always on the lookout. I don't know the exact timeline of when I'll be able to like offer what amount and like cultivate what type of role. But yeah, as this thing builds, and I would say for sure within like the next year or so, I will definitely be aggressively looking to add to my team.
There you go.
Sure.
There you go. Well, Jake, I have 2 last questions. One of them is, what question do you wish that I asked in the interview here?
I always like when people ask for vulnerability. Like, tell me one of the biggest mistakes you ever made. Like things that are uncomfortable. Now, this is my style, right? I don't know if it's yours. Yeah. I like having conversations that are real, that actually maybe are uncomfortable. Like, sure. So what's the biggest mistake you ever made? Or, hey, what do you do that what are you most regretful of? Like things like that. Yeah. And the reason I like that is because it's a badge of honor to me. It's not shameful. Like, I saw you at a clip that I saw where you were talking to someone and you guys were saying like, oh, hey, no one would know that I'm actually an introvert because I act so extroverted in my job.
Yeah.
And the part of that I like to explore the most is I think most people, even adults, don't even really know who they are. Like, because we're all products of what we're used to or what our comfort zone is. So I think that to me, what I find most interesting is the evolution of not just who you are, but who you could be, or who potentially you have the potential to become. Real quick little story. I was in the gym at 5 a.m. I used to go in the morning all the time. Little nerdy guy comes in, right? 140 pounds soaking wet, glasses. He's got like, hair on the sides out to here and like big baggy clothes. And I see him a couple times a week. Then I stop going to the gym at 5. I start going at the end of the day instead. About 4 months later, I go back to the gym at 5. That little nerd walks in, right? Head shaved, looked like he had gained 20 pounds of muscle. Okay. His face looked chiseled. He had grown out a beard. He was wearing like tight clothes. And I'm like, that's a totally different guy. And you could tell by the way he walked, like he had a swagger. And it's like 4 months ago, he never would have thought of himself as that guy. But that's exactly who he is now. And he didn't kind of walk in like he walked in with his chest. Like you could see that guy was feeling himself. And he was in a space that he probably didn't realize he had the ability to get to. Now that's an example of like a physical transformation but it's the same thing to me with personality. So when you talk about, hey, what questions, I always think about asking people like, okay, not just who you are now, but like, if you were to put together like the perfect version of your day or your career, what would it be? And who would you be? And how would you act? And you'd be shocked. People start to say things like, well, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. every day. Okay, well, what time do you wake up now? 7:30. Okay. And in my head, I'm like, well, you can start that now. And then they'll say other things like, oh, well, because I feel like a lot of us have these versions of ourselves we want to be or we think we can be that we just don't ever get to. So I'm always interested in exploring that with people, like not just talking about who we are, but like, hey, I'm 41. I just turned 41 this summer, and I've evolved a lot from 30 to 35, from 35 to 40. I'm sure I'll be different at 45. So I always love talking to people, no matter what age you're at, and not just asking about like, hey, where do you think you're going, but like also like, what about you fundamentally? Do you think you can change, or do you want to change moving forward? What version of yourself do you think you have the ability to be that maybe right now you're not capable of, but that you hope to? So like those are always the questions that I personally think are the most interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, let's wrap this up, man. For our listeners, where can they follow you? Where can they hear from you? Like, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll tell everyone to definitely follow all of your social media. Watch all of John Lee's clips. Be a big John Lee fan because he's going places. And then I'll say for me, I'm kind of insulated because I work in corporate sales, so I don't really work with consumers and the public too much. But anyone who has any interest of reaching out to me, they can email me at lerman.jacob@gmail.com. And I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone or go over anything with anyone who has an interest in reaching out to me. But John, thank you, man. I had a blast talking to you.
Yeah, man. Well, I will be talking to you later, and I appreciate the time, brother.
My pleasure. Hope we get a chance to speak again.
All right, brother. Take care.
Hey, John, go on the day. All right.
I will.
Yeah. You be that version of you that wants to go out and, be dominant, right?
You got it.
Be the nice guy who's dominant. I'm just trying to give you some good clips. That's all.
I know, man. I appreciate it. All right, brother.
All right, have a great one.
All right, bye.
I leave real estate, find you the best rate. All throughout Philly like Schuylkill Expressway. Talking to people who out of the 215, even the 267, who always helping like, oh, no time for no student.